Hey there, thank you for tuning into Duck Breaks, and welcome to another episode of Bionicle Fanon Reviews. I'm Chris, and today we're going to be reviewing the fan-created, canonized Bionicle models. These are not official sets, but they're actually fan models that were accepted into the Bionicle Generation 1 canon via official LEGO-sponsored canon contests like the Dark Hunter and Rahi contest in 2005, or from the more modern canonization contest being currently run by TTV and overseen by Greg Farshti, who is still a current employee at LEGO and kind of the overseer of the Bionicle G1 storyline. Today we'll be taking a look at one of the Dark Hunters from the 05 Dark Hunter contest. In this case, we'll be seeing Primal. Now, Primal was a Dark Hunter who came from an island ravaged by Visorak, which is kind of ironic because his head is a Visorak head. He essentially is very strong-willed and has a very strong sense of justice, which can actually cause him to conflict a lot with the Shadowed One and the other Dark Hunters that he's assigned on mission on. In fact, it's often stated that this strong sense of justice caused him to either kill the person that hired him or kill the Dark Hunters assigned to him as partners. And as such, he's really only sent out on missions that make sense for his morality, and he's rarely ever sent out with other Dark Hunters as partners. Now, Primal refused any augmentation, so this is his regular body, this is his regular form, whatever species he is, save for one minor thing, which was a paralysis device that he uses very sparingly, which I presume is this item right here. Now, in regards to the build, I do want to make one note, is that LEGO actually assembled Primal incorrectly from when he was sent in. The original designer of Primal posted images of what he was supposed to look like, which is this current configuration. When the LEGO group photographed him, the torso was actually backwards, which caused a lot of problems, and obviously I decided to stick to what the builder actually intended, because when you put the torso backwards, which I actually did try, it kind of looks really awkward and doesn't quite look right. So I think this one makes a lot more sense in the configuration that it's in, and that's why I decided to do it, because I feel like whatever the builder intended is closest to canon. Of course, you can just take a look online at the official image of this creature, and that's where you can see the build being built completely backwards. I just wanted to put it back to where the creator actually intended it to go. Now, that being said, I'll be analyzing all of these models on 4 key points. Number 1 is posability. So can I get it into good poses? Can it support its own weight, the weight of its weapon, and so on? Number 2 is building techniques. So is this just recycling stuff from the sets, or is it actually trying out new things? Number 3 is overall aesthetics. So how good does this look? Does this look menacing? Would I want to cross this guy in battle? And number 4 is how well does it fit in universe? So does this make sense and fit within other Bionicle characters? And so with that being said, why don't we dive right into the review of Primal the Dark Hunter. Now, I normally start these videos off by actually spinning them in a 360-degree turnaround. However, as you can see, he's got 5 legs, and I really just couldn't get him to fit on the turnaround spinner. So you're just going to have to take a look at me spinning him around manually, if that's okay. You can see that he actually is a lot larger than it may seem. Actually, the image that the Dark Hunter book used was really just a front image, and I did not even realize just how long this character was until building him myself. That was one of the first of actually many surprises while building this. I do actually want to note that while this one actually is very, very close to the actual model, there have been some very, very minor changes that I just had to make because I didn't have the right pieces. This right there is supposed to be white, not black. Hopefully it's not a huge deal. That's really the only big thing. The tubes are actually supposed to be the milky white version that came with Kreka and not these plain white ones that came in stuff like the Space Monorail. They're really basically the same exact piece. The tube is just slightly transparent. I don't really think that changes many things with aesthetics, so that's why I just left it like that. And besides that, honestly, I do think that this is pretty close to exactly how it was supposed to be. Obviously, some of the joints used here are the 08/2010 joints instead of the joints that were available during that time. However, it's not a huge deal because this joint in particular isn't actually holding anything, it's just there for detail. And as far as the ones that are holding stuff, they have about the same grip as the older joints for this particular piece, so I felt like it was okay to include. Over here, you can immediately see the difference between this one and the actual one that was used for the images. LEGO actually reversed this torso, which really makes no sense at all, so that's why if it looks different from the official image, as I mentioned, the torso has been corrected to be actually pointing the right way. But so with that, let's just dive right into the first point here, which is posability. Now, this one I have to say is a little bit more difficult to pose, but it's not really because it's unstable, it's just because he has so many legs. So obviously you can twist his legs into different positions like so, but that's not all, because obviously you can move around the legs, but you can also move around this whole back abdomen part, kind of like a large spider. This whole claw piece can articulate. It's a bit of an illegal connection, but it's a very common one, and one that LEGO actually used themselves in the Toa Kaida. But this can articulate, this whole piece can articulate here, and you can even bend his entire body like this, which actually causes the tubes to bend rather organically. However, if you bend it too much, these tubes will just pop out of these sockets, so don't mess with it too much like that. The tubes being there actually cause it to be able to be lifted up and not droop all the way down, because the strength of the tubes is actually enough to prevent this segment of the body from drooping down. It's an unorthodox technique, but I actually do quite appreciate it because it does look really cool when you move it around. It looks like it's really organic there, but it actually has a functional purpose too, to prevent it from going down too much, as you can see right here. Moving onwards to the front of the model, once we get him kind of back in the right pose, you can see that his paralyzing device, or whatever you want to call it here, I guess this is a very spider-like attachment, is fully functional. You can really just move this all around, pointed in any direction. To be honest though, it's a little awkward to me, specifically the blue Technic pins. I get that it's supposed to be some sort of a paralyzing injection type thing, but it does kind of look really awkward, especially, looking at this angle here. I don't really know how practical this would be in combat either, because it doesn't even stretch out that far away from his body. It's really just in front of him. So maybe if someone is fighting him really up close and personal, he can use this to inject them really quick and make them fall asleep, but it seems to be kind of impractically placed. Moving on to the arms, they're thankfully a lot more standard, although you do have the full range of articulation. Moving this all the way up and down, it's fully mounted on a ball joint, as well as moving the elbow here, and the hand is borrowing the same technique that's been used for, say, the Makuta Pterodax model in using the Evokis here as claws, which I think for its time works out perfectly fine. On the other hand, he's wielding a staff, which thankfully he can actually brandish using the weight of his arms. It's not like it's drooping down any sort of way whatsoever, and you can actually get it into all sorts of different poses because of just how simple this whole staff setup is. It's a pretty simple thing, but I do actually like it, and it does fit the aesthetic of this creature very well. Moving up to the head, you actually have a full range of ball joint articulation here, which is really nice to see. From the official image, I wasn't exactly sure how this was mounted, but I am happy to report that you can actually move this around pretty well. It is a little restricted just because of the way that the socket is mounted. If we go on the side view here, you'll notice that you can't actually move it up really past this point without actually pulling the ball joint out because of the way that it's mounted. But it's not really a huge deal because you can have him look down side to side and at an angle, just not too much of an angle because of the way it's mounted. It's still a lot better than I expected though, especially for how large the head is. The head, moving on to building techniques, actually uses quite a number of very unique pieces that actually blend very well together. Of course, it uses the standard Visorak head as a frame, which I've seen some models attempt, but usually they don't actually try to do anything too unique outside of just using the Visorak frame. This model, however, actually does something really neat. It takes these Vaki staff pieces, these were actually the tools used by the Vaki, and uses them in a sort of position that looks like jaws, which I think look really good. You can see right here that it looks like these are sharp fangs and almost a mouth sticking out of the Visorak headpiece, which gives it a completely different look and completely sets it apart from the actual Visorak spiders that the piece came from. Not to mention the use of the white Gali hook here is actually perfectly suited to fit the curve of the Visorak spine, which originally was made to accommodate legs, and you've actually got a very solid looking head. The only thing that's kind of awkward to me is just how much clearance it has with this one piece right here. It's so high off of the body here that it looks a little bit awkward. I'm not entirely certain as to how they could have remedied the solution. I don't know if I would have wanted them to mount the ball joint completely flat against the bottom, because that would have really restricted articulation. But maybe just something other than just a Technic tube right here, which really makes it seem very empty at certain angles, would have been a lot better. It just looks like the neck is super flimsy by using that one piece. Moving on to the other building techniques here, I actually do really appreciate how you may not have noticed, but they're using the Throwbot gear pieces right here. These are Throwbot torsos mounted around a Toa Mata torso very seamlessly, and they actually have a Toa Nuva chest plate being used in conjunction with a Toa Nuva leg to form the front of his chest, which actually looks really cool and works out very well because of the curvature of these pieces. One thing that is, however, a little bit strange is that you'll notice that this entire assembly here is only held on by one ball joint. Then how, you may be wondering, does it actually not move around? Well, it's actually a pretty clever building technique, although a little bit illegal. They're using simply the friction between the torso and this Technic beam piece right here to keep the torso at a fixed angle. Obviously, you can wobble it a little bit, but it's pretty fixed because of this Technic piece, and I have to say that's a pretty clever use of pieces, although, of course, not something that LEGO would ever officially do in an actual set. What does bug me a little bit, however, is just how little this actually attaches to the rest of the body. It is held in relatively stably, but at the cost of having a slightly illegal and awkward technique, and I would have appreciated it if the main torso was actually adhered to this lower abdomen piece a little bit better than it actually is. It also causes some awkward gaps and some Technic construction to be used down here just to facilitate this one piece that locks it into place. That being said, as we move around to the back of the spider-like body here, it's very clear that this was a very heavily influenced by arachnids, by actual spiders and insect creatures, and I can't help but think that this one would have maybe been a better fit for the Rahi buildable creature contest because it's so animalistic. That being said, I get the name Primal, and he does have 2 arms and a staff, so I can definitely see him being a Dark Hunter as well. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I really do like the building technique being used of the tubes here, working in a pretty cohesive way to not just add a function to it, preventing this from falling down, but actually looking really cool in movement and adding a lot to the aesthetics of this creature, which really make it feel organic and connected. If you just had this one piece without the tubes, then not only would it be a far less stable connection, but it would feel very, very gappy, and I appreciate the tubes actually making it look like these 2 segments are connected by something other than just one ball joint. The one kind of strange thing to me, however, is the use of different Vaki spines for the legs here. You'll notice that the back tail, I guess, is supposed to be some sort of a stinger-like tail, although it doesn't mention it in the description, is using the sharp Kirak spine piece here, whereas the legs are using a more blunt-edged piece from the other Vaki. Personally, I would have preferred it if they only used this exact spike piece for all of the legs. I feel like aesthetically it fits a spider-like creature a lot more, having these pointed ends, rather than this very mechanical end piece here, which looks more like a drill or a hammer rather than an actual organic spike, like this back one does here. There also are a few kind of strange and illegal techniques exactly holding this back piece together. You'll notice that it doesn't actually move away from this Borak limb here, and that's because there is a bar that's connected in between here, causing it to be forced into place. It's actually very illegal to put a bar here. It will be impossible to separate the bar from this piece in the future, so once you put it in, it's kind of stuck for good. Really not meant to be used in that way, but it does actually hold it together and give it a little bit more stability. So I guess they've traded stability for it being a slightly illegal technique, which honestly I can kind of excuse because I'd much prefer having an illegal technique that no one even realizes is illegal without closely looking at it in the back here, rather than having it continually fall over. Now I do have to say this one thing in regards to posability. Right now it's posing really well and not actually falling over, but mostly because the surface that I use for my reviews is actually a very friction-heavy surface. It's not a surface that it's easy to slip on. However, if I were to move him to the table or some slightly slippery surface, then it becomes a lot harder to pose because there just isn't enough contact points that's making him adhere to the ground, and this is really easy to kind of get out of whack. That being said though, if you have them on carpet, you're going to have no problem, or any surface with a remote amount of friction like this one. But just to sum up the point in terms of overall aesthetics, I have to say that this looks really good. Especially from this angle, I love the use of the Rakshi feet to evoke the bulbous back end of a spider, and while it is of course not a one-by-one comparison of a spider, it only has 5 legs, or maybe only 4 in a stinger, depending on what you want to call this kind of piece right here,
it does actually convey the insectoid look and feel very, very well because of the bulbous backs here kind of being segmented in joints. I just really like the way that this looks. Moving all the way around the body here, of course, while the staff is relatively simple, I do actually appreciate it because, of course, his name is Primal. It's not like he's going to be using anything fancy like a Ratuka spinner or some fancy weapon. No, it just looks like he's using some staff or some spike that he can use for close combat, which makes a lot of sense for a model and character like this. And so all in all, I think aesthetics are quite good outside of the really, really long neck that he has. And this is easily one of the best looking Dark Hunters with one of the most cohesive color schemes out of them. He's basically just purely white and silver. Any black pieces here are really only because of Technic beams, which I can kind of excuse, or in this case, my own mistake of not being able to find the right piece in the right color. Other than that though, the builder actually made the effort to use some rarer white Technic axles, like this back one right here is a pretty rare 2-length Technic axle in white. They didn't need to actually use that, but they did, and that makes it look a lot better and a lot more fitting in with the color scheme. So I actually do really appreciate the attention to detail being used throughout this model. Despite seeming to have a relatively flimsy frame and so many different ball joints segmenting the body, the specific piece usages and the way that pieces come together, legal or illegal, actually cause it to be a relatively sturdy creature with a lot of articulation, which I find is really cool. But so now that we've summed up the first 3 points, I think it's time to zoom out and compare this against some representative samples. Now, this one will be kind of interesting because, of course, you can make the Visorak comparison, but he isn't really supposed to be a Visorak. In fact, he comes from an island that the Visorak raided. He has no goodwill towards the Visorak for sure, and I don't really know what else to compare him to just because he is so unique. I guess I'll bring over some other Dark Hunters just so you can see how he stacks up compared to them, though.
Alright, so for comparison purposes, I've placed Primal alongside some other spider-like Bionicle creatures, 2 of which are official LEGO models using the same Visorak headpiece. You can see the original Visorak model here, as well as one of the combo models. I believe this is the Venom Flyer, which also uses his same carapace. And we have also the Silver Shoot Spider, which is actually supposed to be a pure Rahi 8-legged spider, essentially what a spider looks like in the Bionicle universe. And I've also brought over some other random Dark Hunters like Guardian right here just to show an example in terms of scale. Now immediately you can see that while he does look similar to some of these other creatures, Primal actually does stand out by being completely unique to any other spider creature before him. He doesn't really resemble the Visorak too much outside of just the same piece being used for the head, nor does he resemble the Venom Flyer at all either. He's pretty much completely unique as he is. Even when compared to another spider-like canon model like the Silver Shoot Spider right here, Primal stands apart because his legs are less consolidated and more split across different segments of his abdomen, which I think is a pretty unique detail for a spider-like creature. When compared against a standard-sized Dark Hunter like this one, you'll notice that they stand relatively at approximately the same height, which I do feel like is a big pro to this model in particular, is that despite having this whole animal-like aesthetic, being completely monstrous, he does scale quite well next to another Dark Hunter. He doesn't look too tall that it's unbelievable, nor does he look too much like a Rahi or some other creature that doesn't really make sense standing next to an actual person who's standing up like this one. They scale pretty well next to each other, and you can definitely see them being sent out on assignments together. But now, setting aside the believability in universe representative models, let's just focus in on this point of believability in universe. Now, a few people have commented that this point maybe doesn't make too much sense, specifically because the models were designed before a backstory was given to them. And as such, it's a little bit unfair to be comparing it against a backstory that wasn't written at the time it was built. I totally understand that point, I just want to address it in context of its backstory, so it's really like ranking the model not just based on the circumstances of when it was built, but just the model and character as a whole, if that makes sense. The other reason why I do this point is again to compare it against official models in the universe like these ones, so I can see exactly how well it scales against them. For that second point there, I think it does remarkably well. It has its own unique aesthetic, but it does actually seem like it fits into the universe and shares some design similarities with existing LEGO sets and existing canon models. The thing is, however, the backstory, because the backstory says that he came from an island ravaged by the Visorak. He does not like the Visorak, and he's kind of dedicated to justice. He has a strong sense of justice. He really only uses his paralytic weapon here only when he has to, which I think is a little bit interesting given the exact look and feel of this model, which seems like it's very much like an animal you'd expect him to be very savage, or maybe someone you really wouldn't want to cross in terms of a fight. You don't know what he's going to do to you. But instead he has this backstory where he has a strong sense of justice, he doesn't want to harm people who don't deserve it, and he oftentimes just is trying to do the right thing, which I think is pretty interesting for a model like this. Is it conveyed in the design language though? I'm not entirely sure. He's got a very deadly looking staff, which definitely doesn't look like a guy saying he's only out to do the right thing. And of course, this paralytic injector in the front here is pretty menacing on its own. I definitely wouldn't want to get injected by that. And of course, he has this very unsettling appearance as something that's not quite humanoid, almost like a centaur had a lower half of a spider. So definitely something that I'm not entirely sure if it fits the backstory completely. And the other kind of strange thing is that his island was destroyed by Visorak. So why does he look so much like a Visorak? I'd say he looks a little bit different, but again, he's using the same headpiece, and he is literally a large spider. So I'm not entirely sure what the deal is with that. I probably would have preferred some sort of a backstory that said maybe he was a mutated Visorak that gained sentience and had some will of his own, because that would make a lot of sense going from here to here. As it is right now, though, having him being a part of some unnamed species on an island that was destroyed by Visorak doesn't make too much sense to me for this character, but that's just my personal opinion, and I personally don't want to ding it too much because, again, this was built far before a backstory was given to it. If anyone's at fault here, it's the person who gave the backstory to him, which was Greg Farshke, and not the builder of the model itself. But just keeping all of this in mind, I do want to give it a 7 out of 10 in terms of believability in universe. It scales relatively well next to other creatures. It's just the backstory not making too much sense that I don't really jive with this model. Now, speaking of which, it's time to go to the next point, which is overall aesthetics. And I do actually want to give this one a 9 out of 10. This looks incredibly intimidating. I love the way the flex tubes work such that they actually bend and flex when you move certain segments of the body. The whole way that the Rakshi feet are used as abdomen pieces here make a lot of sense. And this just looks like a complete model. Factoring in the color scheme, aesthetics, really everything about it just feels very complete. The only kind of strange thing here is the use of these just standard blue Technic pins as his paralytic injectors. That feels like maybe there was something a little bit more unique that could have been done there. I don't necessarily know why it uses these particular pieces. They feel a tad out of place to me, so I will kind of give it a con based on that, but everything else about this model looks really great and really looks like a true animal. But then moving on to the next point, which is building techniques. I want to give this one a 8 out of 10 on building techniques. And the reason why it is not a perfect score is that while it does do a lot of really cool things, there's just a few things that it does that are blatantly illegal. Stuff like shoving a bar through this Borak arm piece, which really shouldn't be done, kind of bugged me while building it, as I had to apply a lot of force to push that bar through. Other things like even the way that this back claw is mounted is a bit of an illegal technique, and there's some other stuff like it when you go further in the build. And also, as much as I did praise these flex tubes being used right here, they're very illegal. In fact, the back ends are not connected to anything. They're literally just wedged in between the Rakshi feet, and of course, if you pull it too hard, they will just snap off. So that is a bit of a con where building techniques are concerned, I will have to say. Other than that though, I think it's very solid despite the weapon being very simplistic. I will say that it fits the model quite well, and as such, that's why it's getting a score of 8 out of 10. But now for the final point, which is posability, I'm going to give this one a 9 out of 10. You can really pose it very well in very interesting poses. Obviously, as I mentioned, I was suitably impressed with the way that the head can be moved around on a ball joint. The arms function exactly like arms should. He can wield his weapon completely without it drooping or falling over. And he does have a full range of articulation, not only throughout his legs individually, but also kind of wiggling around the entire abdomen like so. That being said, as I did mention, it is kind of easier to get this into awkward poses. You'll notice that sometimes this piece can just bend and collapse in when he's on a slippery surface, and you kind of have to correct it by really just splaying everything out again and making sure that everything is okay. The back piece right here doesn't really do anything in terms of posability and can often just stick straight up in the air if you're not paying attention, or it was bent down at the wrong angle and then lifted back up, so it really doesn't do much in terms of posability, although you can use it to get into interesting poses, and maybe even point it upwards to be used as a stinger tail like so. So there are different things that you can do with it, which I do appreciate, which is why, again, it's getting a much higher score. But so with that, I think we've about summed up the Dark Hunter Primal. What do you guys think of this build? And shout out to Vaki6 who composed the building instructions for this model. I believe it was 2 years ago actually when he posted the instructions. I've included a link in the description below to a very helpful topic on the TTV message boards where you can find instructions to every single Dark Hunter in existence. Credits to a ton of very talented builders out there in the community, but all of them are compiled there. The most recent ones are there, so there really is no reason, if you are willing to build this and have the pieces, you can go ahead and seek out the instructions. And actually, for a model like this one, I'd actually recommend building it because it does look really, really cool as a display model and is one of my favorite Dark Hunters aesthetically speaking. But so we've wrapped up this video. Again, let me know down in the comments below, what do you guys think of Primal the Dark Hunter? Do you agree with the points I listed? Do you like his backstory? Are you okay with it? And how do you like the way that he looks? Also, let me know if there's any model that you want to see me review next that I haven't reviewed already. I do want to make a note though, I will be only reviewing models that people have posted instructions for. I unfortunately don't have that much time to piece together models just from my own parts, just by kind of staring at the one image that we have of them, and it's just quite frankly a lot easier for me to get the instructions that have been officially posted and review models based off of those. So for all the people asking for the Kanohi Dragon, I really desperately want to build the Kanohi Dragon too. But unfortunately, as of the time of this recording, which it's currently January, there are no instructions available for this model. Hopefully by the time this video releases, maybe that will have changed. And if so, I'll make a note of it in the comment, and if so, I'll definitely have been building it already. But that all wraps up this video. Thank you so much for tuning into Duck Bricks, and stay tuned for even more LEGO news, reviews, discussion, and analyses coming your way very soon. And tune in every single Monday for a new Bionicle Fanon review. Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you again very soon. Bye-bye for now.